weakly collapsed by her riverbank with blood on his hands and a name he refused to give. But as a single mother shelters the haunted stranger, secrets rise that could destroy them both. She's running from her past, he's hiding from his. And one forgotten letter may reveal the truth neither is ready to face. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Hannah Brooks had learned long ago how to blend into the quiet edges of life. In the small countryside town of Alderhill, she passed modest. A woman in her late 20s, worn boots and tired eyes, pushing forward day by day with her 5-year-old son Mason in tow. Every morning was the same, Mason's small hand in hers, the gravel path crunching underfoot as they walked through the morning fog toward the tiny brick schoolhouse that sat at the edge of town. But that morning, something changed. The mist hung thick and low over the riverbank trail. Mason, chattering about frogs and storybooks, suddenly stopped. "Mum," he whispered, tugging her sleeve, "is that man sleeping?" Hannah followed his gaze. A figure lay half-shrouded in tall reeds near the edge of the river, his jacket soaked, one arm curled under him like he had fallen hard. She stepped in front of Mason instinctively. "Stay right here," she said softly, heart racing. She approached slowly, her years of suppressed panic clawing at the edges of her calm. As she knelt down, the man stirred. A low groan escaped his lips. Blood seeped from a gash just beneath his ribcage. His face was battered, caked with dried mud and something darker. He flinched as her hand brushed his shoulder. "I don't need help," he muttered hoarsely, trying to sit up. "You're bleeding," Hannah said, already pulling out her phone. "You're not walking away from this." "I said no hospitals." She hesitated. That voice, there was something behind it, not just pain, but urgency, fear. Hannah made a decision. She scrolled through her contacts and dialed one number. "Claire," she said, the moment her best friend answered. "I need your help. No questions. My place. First aid kit. Now." 20 minutes later, Caleb, the man barely able to whisper his name, lay on Hannah's spare bed, his shirt cut open as Claire, a nurse from the local clinic, stitched the wound in his side. He said little. Every movement was stiff, every glance guarded. Claire eyed Hannah once Caleb had dozed off. "He's been through something. Military, maybe? Or worse. That necklace? Dog tags?" "Think I don't know," Hannah replied, staring at the closed door. "He didn't say much." "You sure about letting him stay?" "Ah," she admitted, "but something tells me he doesn't have anywhere else." Later, after Claire left, Hannah sat at the kitchen table with Mason. The boy was quiet, thoughtful, until he asked the question she'd been bracing for. "Is he a soldier?" Hannah blinked. "Why do you think that?" "He has a necklace like the one in the army book, but his eyes are sad, like yours were when I was a baby." Her heart collapsed. That night, she made a bed on the couch, just in case. Caleb stirred only once, murmuring names in his sleep, names she didn't recognize, and when the moonlight caught the silver glint of his necklace, something shifted in her. A stranger bleeding by the river was never part of her carefully rebuilt life. But then again, neither was peace. The next morning, Hannah woke early, her body stiff from the couch and her thoughts already racing. She made coffee, staring at the steam as if it held answers. Upstairs, Mason's footsteps thumped lightly, then silence, then the creak of the spare room door. She hurried up the stairs. She found them both awake, Mason sitting cross-legged at the foot of the bed, chattering about his toy cars. Caleb sat propped against the pillows, one arm cradling his side, his expression unreadable. "I told him not to climb on the bed," Caleb said dryly. "And he listens to no one," Hannah replied, crossing her arms. Mason turned. "He said his name is Caleb. That's a cool name, right, Mom?" "Eek," she said cautiously. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." His tone was clipped, formal. "Thanks for not asking too many questions." "I've learned not to," she replied. "We all have our ghosts." His eyes met hers, and for the briefest second, something softened in him. She left a tray of oatmeal and tea by the bed, noticing how Caleb's gaze lingered on Mason, perhaps noticing how creamy he was. As the days passed, Caleb remained quiet but observant. He moved carefully through her home, never taking up space, always watching. He helped where he could, fixing a loose cabinet door, changing a light bulb, straightening Mason's bike tires. Each action was deliberate, controlled, like muscle memory he couldn't shake. One afternoon, while Mason napped and rain pelted the windows, Caleb stood by the sink rinsing dishes. Hannah leaned on the counter, drying her hands. "He said you've learned not to ask questions," he said quietly. "But I keep wondering if anyone ever asked about you." She looked at him, taken aback. "Not really, and that's usually how I prefer it." He nodded, his jaw working. "Us things," he added, "like the way you flinch at slamming doors, or how you always check the lock twice." She said nothing, her hand still gripping the dish towel. Then he reached slowly toward the inside of his shirt and pulled out the silver chain. Dog tags, worn, scratched. He didn't offer them, just let her see. "I've been in places that don't exist on maps," he said. "Seen things I wish I hadn't. Left things behind, people." Hannah swallowed. "That's why you won't go to a hospital?" He nodded. She gestured to his necklace. "What do the initials stand for?" He hesitated. "Caleb Ryan Whitmore." The sheet stiffened. The name, it felt oddly familiar, like something she might have seen in a forgotten headline. But she didn't press. That evening, as Mason colored at the table, he called Caleb over. "Can you draw a soldier?" he asked. Caleb sat beside him, his large hands awkward around the crayon. Hannah watched from the kitchen as Caleb slowly sketched a man, not with a gun, but kneeling, arms outstretched toward a child. A scar ran across the man's face. Mason pointed. "That's you." Caleb blinked, then smiled faintly. "Maybe." Later that night, as Hannah folded laundry in her room, she felt a shift behind her. Caleb stood in the doorway. His eyes dropped briefly to the faded scars along her forearms, barely visible now, but still there. "I know what pain looks like," he said softly. "And I know what it feels like when you stop trying to run from it." She turned to face him. "Then you also know," she whispered, "some of us never had the luxury of running." The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. And in that moment, neither of them felt quite so alone. The next week passed in a strange rhythm of quiet chores, soft glances, and unspoken understanding. Caleb never overstepped. He offered his strength without pride, silently fixing the shed door, reinforcing a broken fence, even stacking firewood without being asked. His presence was steady, like a shadow that no longer frightened Hannah. Mason, however, had taken to Caleb in a way that both surprised and unnerved her. The boy followed him everywhere, peppering him with questions about what kind of animals he liked, whether he'd ever flown a plane, and if he believed in monsters. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, whittling a block of wood into a crude toy truck, Mason asked, "Have you ever seen a wolf?" Caleb didn't look up. "Once, a long time ago." "Were you scared?" "A little," Caleb said, his voice low. "But sometimes wolves are just soldiers in disguise, hiding because they've been hurt." Mason tilted his head. "Did you hide too?" Caleb paused, then gave a soft, half nod. "For a while." That night at dinner, Hannah served vegetable soup and cornbread. Mason slurped loudly, grinning. Caleb ate slower, quietly, his gaze flitting between mother and son. "You remind me of my real dad," Mason said suddenly, glancing at Caleb. The spoon froze halfway to Caleb's mouth. Hannah's eyes flicked toward Caleb, then quickly back to Mason. "Eat your soup, baby," she said gently, her voice laced with quiet warning. Mason blinked, then returned to his bowl. Caleb set his spoon down and wiped his hands. "Excuse me?" he murmured, rising and stepping out onto the porch. Later that night, when Mason was asleep, Hannah stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the dark. Caleb hadn't returned to finish his meal. She found him leaning against the wooden railing, cigarette unlit between his fingers. eyes staring at nothing. "She didn't mean anything by it," she said. "I know," Caleb replied. "Kids say what they feel. It's honest. Just took me off guard." She hesitated. "You don't have to talk about it. But I heard you were discharged, not honorably." He turned his face slightly, as if the darkness shielded him. "I was part of something that went sideways, a command I questioned too late. There were casualties, civilians. They needed someone to blame." She asked softly. Caleb shrugged. "I wasn't innocent, but I wasn't the villain either." Hannah nodded, stepping closer. "Sounds familiar." She didn't elaborate, but her voice trembled just enough. That night, she awoke in cold sweat, heart racing, the echoes of old fear crawling down her spine. A shadow had crossed her dream, a man with eyes for words and eyes like broken glass. She hadn't said his name in years. She didn't need to. She sat on the floor beside her bed, head in her hands, trying not to cry loud enough to wake Mason. She didn't hear Caleb come in, but when she looked up, he was there, silent, expression unreadable. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix it. He simply knelt beside her and draped a soft wool blanket over her shoulders. And then, as quiet as he'd come, he left. In the days that followed, something shifted between them, not in declarations, but in rhythm. Caleb chopped vegetables while Hannah stirred the pot. They planted herbs near the back fence. Mason, sticky with jam and sunshine, narrated each step like a tiny tour guide. Hannah found herself laughing again. Not forced, not polite, real, loud, the kind that caught her by surprise and made her glance around, wondering if she was allowed to feel that way again. Caleb would sometimes look at her then, and though he said nothing, there was always something in his eyes, a softness she didn't know how to name. The sun dipped low one evening, casting warm light across the small garden. Caleb sat sharpening an old garden spade while Mason played nearby with sticks shaped like swords. Hannah knelt by a row of tomato plants, humming softly, a tune Caleb had started to recognize as her comfort song. He glanced up, noticing the calm in her features. The tension she once wore like armor had begun to loosen. Her smile reached her eyes now. "Smells like rain," he said. Hannah looked toward the sky. "Good. The ground needs it." As if summoned, a few drops landed on her arms. Mason squealed and ran toward the porch. Caleb held out a hand to help her up. She took it without hesitation. Inside, they dried off and settled around the kitchen. Hannah reheated leftover stew while Caleb told Mason another story, this time about a fox who learned to trust again. He was scared, Caleb said, voice low and steady, because he thought the world had no place for someone like him. But the forest didn't ask questions. It just gave him space. Mason yawned mid-sentence. "I think I like the fox." Caleb smiled. "Me too." After putting Mason to bed, Hannah returned to the kitchen. Caleb was washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, humming faintly. She leaned against the doorway, watching him. "You don't have to do all this," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." There was something deeper in those words, a quiet offering, not just of help, but of presence. She stepped forward and took the towel from him, drying a bowl. "You're good with him." Clint glanced at her. "He's a good kid." "I need stability," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I never had growing up, something I'm trying so hard to give him." "You're doing it," Caleb said, "more than you know." She looked down, then back up at him. "Sometimes I think, maybe I'm enough, and then other times I remember where we came from, what we ran from." He nodded slowly. "You're more than enough, Hannah." The words settled between them like the warm light of a fire, unspoken, steady. But the world outside wasn't still. The next day, Hannah heard murmurs at the local store. "Did you hear? She's hiding some stranger in her house. Tall, scarred, ex-military type. Dangerous, probably." Poor Mason. That boy doesn't need more chaos. Hannah paid for her groceries in silence, lips pressed tightly together, eyes forward. By the time she got home, the wind had picked up. Mason was drawing at the table, Caleb fixing a hinge on the back door. She set the bag down. The town knows, they're talking. Caleb stood still for a moment, then turned to face her. Do you want me to leave? The word escaped before she could think. Then more firmly, no, I don't. He watched her for a long beat, then nodded. Then I'll stay, until you tell me otherwise. What neither of them realized was that miles away, someone else had heard the whispers too. Her past, her fear, the man she thought she'd buried with the name she changed, and the town she ran from. He was listening now, and this time, he wasn't alone. That night, Hannah sat at the edge of her bed, clutching an old photo Mason had drawn. Him, her, and Caleb standing under a big sun. She didn't know what would come next, but she did know one thing. They were no longer just surviving. They were something like a family, and she would fight for it if the past tried to take it away. The rain was steady that morning, tapping against the windows as Hannah folded laundry on the couch. Mason was building a blanket fort in the corner, narrating his grand adventure with toy soldiers and a stuffed bear named General Buttons. Khalil had gone out to the shed to fix a leaky tarp before the storm worsened. As she picked up a pile of clothing from the laundry basket, something heavier slipped from the folds. A faded green military jacket. It wasn't one she'd seen him wear lately. Potent feelings, she put the jacket down and carefully laid the jacket flat. In the inner pocket, her hand brushed against paper. It was a letter, torn, water-stained, and wrinkled. Her breath caught when she saw the first few words written in careful handwriting. To my son, Dolan. She froze. The rest of the letter was unfinished, like someone had started to pour their heart onto the page, but couldn't bear to finish. Just below, barely legible through smudged ink, were fragments of sentences. I wanted to be the man you needed. I tried, but war changes everything. The sound of the door creaking made her tuck the letter back into the jacket, setting it aside quickly. Caleb stepped in, rain-drenched and wiping his hands with a rag. His eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on the jacket. Their gazes met. You found it, he said quietly. I wasn't looking, it just fell out. He nodded once, but didn't move. I didn't read it all, she added softly, but I saw his name, Dylan. His expression changed. The strength he wore like armor seemed to crack at the edges. I would have been 6 this year, he said, voice rough. Hannah's throat tightened. That's Mason's age. Caleb didn't respond. He moved to the kitchen window, his back to her, as if needing something to stare into that wasn't her eyes. She waited, giving him space. He died while I was away, he said finally. In Afghanistan. I wasn't there to say goodbye. Not for the hospital, not the funeral, not for anything. Hannah stepped forward. I'm so sorry. My wife blamed me, said I loved my duty more than my family. I came back to an empty house. Divorce papers. And silence. Hannah's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. And you've been carrying that ever since? He nodded. Some days, I forget how to breathe, and then Mason says something or laughs, and I remember Dylan's voice. Just for a second. She reached out, touched his arm gently. Pain like that, it doesn't vanish. But maybe it changes. I don't know if mine ever will. Hannah looked toward the hallway where Mason's humming echoed faintly. You're not the only one who lost everything. Caleb turned to her, waiting. I was a music teacher, she said, barely audible. Used to play concert halls, led a youth choir. Had students who went on to play in symphonies. Then I married the wrong man. Slowly he chipped away everything I loved. And when I tried to leave, he burned what was left of me. Caleb's gaze sharpened, not with judgment but with recognition. He told people I was unstable, that I endangered children, I lost my job, my license, my name. Her eyes welled, but she didn't let the tears fall. So I ran, changed towns, started over. For Mason. He was silent, absorbing it all. Running, Caleb said finally, isn't weakness. It's what we do when no one stays to fight for us. Her breath hitched. Exactly. He gave her a look that felt like an anchor in a storm, steady, understanding, true. And in that fragile silence, Mason sat at the old upright piano, pressing a few careful keys. A simple, wandering melody. Hannah smiled gently and walked toward him, placing her hands softly on the keys beside his. She began to hum. Then sing, just a lullaby, just enough. From the hallway, Caleb watched. And though he didn't join them, his hand curled around the edge of the doorframe, holding on to something real for the first time in a long time. Later that night, long after Mason had fallen asleep and the rain had quieted to a drizzle, Hannah stood in the kitchen, drying the last of the dishes. The quietness felt heavier than usual, not uncomfortable, but meaningful, as if the house itself was listening, holding its breath with them. She reached for the dish rag when she noticed something new on the counter. A folded piece of paper, plain, white, no envelope, no name. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was neat, familiar. "Thank you for letting me feel again." Her breath caught. Just a single line, but it landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. Not many words, just the right ones. She held the letter against her chest for a long moment, then tucked it carefully into a small drawer beneath the sink. She didn't need more than that, not yet. A few days passed. They began cooking together in the mornings. Caleb chopped vegetables, Hannah stirred pots, Mason counted spoonfuls aloud like a game. The kitchen, once filled with silence and tension, now echoed with gentle laughter and the clinking of dishes. Caleb was still reserved, still watchful, but his presence no longer felt like a stranger's shadow. He belonged, somehow, in a way none of them could explain. In the afternoons, Mason sat in the yard with Caleb, stacking rocks and twigs into strange little forts. Caleb taught him how to tie knots, basic ones first, then stronger ones. When Mason asked why, he simply said, "Because sometimes the right knot keeps everything from falling apart." Hannah overheard and smiled to herself. But in quiet moments, the weight of what they'd shared lingered like smoke in the corners. Caleb would stand on the porch at night, watching the stars with haunted eyes. Hannah would sometimes find herself staring at the piano, wondering if the music had ever truly left her or just gone quiet. One evening, while folding laundry in her bedroom, Hannah found Mason asleep on her bed. He had Caleb's old military necklace curled in his tiny hand. Her heart skipped. She carefully took it from him, planning to return it, but the chain slipped through her fingers and landed open across the blanket. The dog tag read, "Caleb James Walker, U.S. Marine Corps. Dylan Walker's son." A second tag dangled beside it, etched with the faint image of a pair of tiny footprints. She ran her fingers across the metal, her throat tightening. That night, she placed the necklace back on Caleb's nightstand. She didn't mention it. She didn't need to. The next morning, gossip started swirling in town. A woman at the grocery store gave Hannah a look. Not cruel, but curious. She heard someone whisper, "She's hiding a man." Another muttered, "Isn't she the one who changed her name?" Her stomach twisted. She knew too well how fast whispers became stories, and how stories became danger. What she didn't know was that miles away, in a dark bar just off a rural highway, a man named Cole was nursing a glass of bourbon when he overheard a conversation. "You hear about Hannah Brooks, the quiet one who keeps to herself? Heard she's got some guy living with her now. Looks military, real quiet type." Cole looked up sharply. He leaned in. "What did you say her name was?" The bartender shrugged. "Brooks. Or maybe it was Harper. Can't remember. You know how new people are." Cole set his glass down slowly. His eyes narrowed. And just like that, the past began to move again. Back at the cabin, Hannah watched Caleb and Mason chase each other through the dew-soaked grass. The sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the field. She smiled. But deep down, a flicker of unease began to stir. Something was coming. She just didn't know what yet. The storm came in like a fist, angry clouds twisting above the countryside, wind howling through the trees behind Hannah's modest home. Rain pounded the windows as the thunder rolled, loud enough to make Mason whimper in his sleep. Caleb had been sitting on the couch, watching the flickering lights with wary eyes, when the power cut out altogether. Hannah moved quickly, lighting candles from the kitchen drawer with steady hands. She tried to act calm, but the tremor in her fingers betrayed her. She hated storms, too many memories buried in lightning flashes. Then, without a word, Caleb slipped on his boots and coat and stepped into the downpour. "Caleb," she called out, but he was already gone, disappearing into the curtain of rain. She stood frozen, unsure whether to follow or wait, her heart pounding with worry. Minutes passed before the low grumble of her generator came to life in the backyard. Light returned to the house, soft and golden. A moment later, Caleb stumbled through the door, soaked to the bone and bleeding again. His stitches had come. "Are you crazy?" Hannah said, rushing to him. "You're bleeding." "Generator was dying," he muttered, brushing off concern. "Mason can't sleep in the dark. I heard him crying." Hannah didn't argue. She guided him to the couch, fetched the first aid kit, and knelt beside him. Her hands worked swiftly, dabbing antiseptic and redressing his wound with quiet determination. The only sound was the steady tap of rain on the windows and Caleb's breath hitching when she touched raw skin. Their faces were inches apart. He smelled of rain, sweat, and something else, something raw and real. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. She paused, searching his face, his eyes darker in the flickering candlelight. There was something unspoken hanging between them, something fragile, electric. He lifted his hand, brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't pull away. Then Mason called from the next room. The moment shattered. Hannah blinked, stood up too fast. "I'll check on him." Caleb nodded, silently watching her disappear down the hallway. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the sky was still gray with lingering fog. Hannah needed groceries, more candles, milk for Mason, and extra bandages for Caleb. She left them at the house with promises to be quick and drove into the center of town, a mere 15 minutes away. She walked down the grocery aisles, distracted, thinking about the way Caleb had looked at her last night. Like she wasn't invisible, like she mattered. She rounded a corner near the checkout and froze. A man stood by the magazine rack, arms folded, face mostly hidden under a baseball cap. But the stance, the tilt of his head, felt like a slap from the past. No, couldn't be. Her heart pounded. She turned quickly and left her cart, bolting for the door. She didn't breathe until she reached her truck and locked the doors. She sat there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, forcing herself to calm down. That night, it happened. A knock at the door. Not loud, but firm. She looked through the peephole. A uniform. "James Brooks?" the officer asked when she opened it. She nodded cautiously. "Tina's a normal casket building something." "There's been someone asking questions around town," he said. "Man fitting a dangerous profile. Said he's looking for someone who matches your description. You might want to stay alert." Her stomach dropped. She thanked him, shut the door, and locked it, then turned to find Caleb already standing behind her. "Who are you running from?" he asked gently. Her breath hitched, and her walls, so carefully built, crumbled. "I was married," Hannah began, voice barely above a whisper, her arms wrapped around herself as if holding in the pieces. His name was Cole Matthews. Everyone thought he was charming, generous, but behind closed doors, he broke things. Mostly me. Caleb didn't move. He waited, quiet and still, his presence steady like an anchor. "I stayed for 2 years longer than I should have. I was pregnant. I kept thinking, if I just loved him better, if I just stayed quiet, it would change. But he didn't change. He got worse. And the night Mason was born, her throat closed. He didn't even come to the hospital." Caleb's hands curled into fists, but he said nothing. "I left with a diaper bag and $28 in my purse," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Mason was 6 weeks old. I drove until my car broke down. A woman in the next town gave me a sandwich and told me about this place. I changed my name and started over." Her voice trembled. I've been hiding ever since, working jobs no one wants, watching every shadow. She looked up at him then, as if bracing for judgment. But Caleb's face didn't twist with pity, only a quiet storm of understanding. I know what it means to be hunted, he said finally, and I know what it costs to survive. Hannah frowned. You never told me why you left the military. He took a breath, like it hurt to inhale that truth. Because I was the scapegoat. He sat down at the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees. We were overseas. My unit got a tip about a weapons stockpile in a civilian zone. I told my CO we needed confirmation. He ignored me. We went in. It was a setup. His jaw tensed. 2 civilians died, a father and his little boy. My commanding officer, he had connections. I didn't. They pinned it on me. Hannah's breath caught. I came home to my wife and son, he went on. But I wasn't a hero. I was dishonorably discharged. No pension, no career, no second chance. My wife, she couldn't look at me. She took Dylan and left. He blinked hard. He died 2 months later, some kind of accident. I didn't even get to the hospital in time. Hannah stepped closer, her hand hovering near his shoulder. You never deserved that. He looked up at her, eyes bloodshot but steady. Neither did you. For a long time, neither spoke. The air between them was full of broken pieces slowly finding where they fit. I'm not a good man, Hannah, Caleb said quietly. But I won't let him hurt you, or Mason. She nodded, wiping her tears. And I won't let your past define you. Stood there, facing each other like 2 people finally seen. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the wind still whispered along the trees. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, just for tonight, they weren't alone. The morning Caleb left, the air was unusually still. He stood at the doorway, his bag slung over his shoulder, eyes locked with Hannah's. Failures eyes. I won't be long, he said quietly. There's someone I need to see. Someone who can help us. Legally. Hannah nodded, trying not to let the fear show in her face. Just be careful. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I will. Keep the doors locked. Call me if anything seems off. Hours passed. Mason played quietly with his blocks near the living room window while Hannah folded laundry, the TV on low. She kept checking the clock, waiting for Caleb's voice to buzz through her phone. But it was silence that answered her every time. Then came the knock. It was soft, too soft for Caleb's usual confident rapping. Hannah's instincts screamed. She approached the door and peered through the peephole. She froze, heart pounding. He looked different. Clear, clean suit, simple, like he'd walked out of a courtroom instead of the wreckage of their past. His smile was polite, friendly, even. But his eyes, cold, calculating. Just want to talk, he said when she cracked the door an inch. Mason peeked from the hallway and whimpered. Hannah stiffened. That sound, small, scared, ignited something deep in her. You need to leave, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I have every right to see my son, Cole argued, stepping closer. No, you don't. Not without going through court. And even then, his smirk twisted. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Hannah slammed the door and locked it. She backed away, fumbling for her phone. Her fingers found the screen. Caleb's contact, ringing. Please pick up, she whispered. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight. Hannah? Cole's here. He found us. There was silence, then the sound of a car engine revving in the background. I'm coming. Stay inside. Don't let him in. By the time Caleb returned, Cole was gone. But the damage was done. Hannah met him at the door, Mason clinging to her leg, eyes wide. He said he just wanted to talk, she murmured. Caleb's dropped. He always says that, until he's inside. They sat together on the couch, the lights dimmed low. Caleb paced while Hannah watched him with wary eyes. I should have known he'd come after you, Caleb muttered. I should have stayed. Pull you down. You couldn't have known, but I'm not letting him scare me anymore. She stood, her voice trembling but firm. I want to file a restraining order, and if it comes to it, I'll testify." Caleb turned, surprised. "Are you sure?" "No," she whispered. "But I'm tired of hiding, and Mason deserves peace." At that moment, the boy looked up from where he sat curled on the rug. "Caleb?" he asked softly. Caleb kneeled beside him. "Yeah, buddy?" Mason blinked, voice barely above a whisper. Are you my new dad?" The question knocked the wind from Caleb's lungs. He swallowed hard, eyes stinging. "I'm not your dad, Mason, but I'm your protector, for as long as you'll have me." Mason nodded and hugged him tightly. Hannah turned away, a tear slipping down her cheek. Later that night, after Mason had drifted to sleep, Hannah stood at her dresser, sorting through old keepsakes. Her hands stilled as she came across a folded photo, creased and weathered from time. It was Caleb, much younger, holding a tiny baby. The joy on his face was undeniable. She didn't ask. She simply placed the photo beside her own, the one of Mason asleep in her arms. 2 different pictures, 2 different wounds, but something in them matched. 2 broken families, slowly, carefully, fitting together. The next morning brought no sunlight. The seemed to seep through the windows and settle in Hannah's bones. She brewed coffee quietly, the smell of her nerves. Caleb stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the edge of the woods, like he expected Cole to emerge from the mist. "I called Captain Ramos," he said. "Old friend from my deployment. He's working in military legal now. Said he can help expedite a protective order, especially with my testimony about Cole's past threats." Hannah nodded. "Thank you for doing this, for believing me." "I didn't have to believe," Caleb replied. "I've seen enough to know." They shared a quiet look, one heavy with the weight of things unspoken. Later that afternoon, they drove into town together, Caleb never leaving Hannah's side. At the courthouse, she held her breath while signing the paperwork for the restraining order. Her fingers trembled, but her spine was straight. When they stepped out into the sunlight, it felt different, warmer, like freedom. Still, shadows followed. That evening, as Mason lay curled on the couch watching cartoons, Caleb pulled out a tattered folder. "There's something I want you to know," he said, voice low. Hannah leaned in. "This was my son, Tyler." He slid a photo forward, the same baby from the night before, swaddled in a blue blanket. In Caleb's arms, the child's mouth was wide open in a laugh. "He was barely a year old when my wife and I separated. I got deployed overseas, came back to a custody battle and a court system that didn't care what I'd sacrificed." Hannah placed a gentle hand on the photo. "What happened to him?" "You moved away with her. I got pictures sometimes, letters. Then they stopped. I tried, Hannah. I fought." His voice cracked, "But they made me feel like I didn't matter. Like I was just a man with scars." Hannah exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry. I know what that kind of silence does to a person." He looked at her then, not just looked, but saw her. The way her eyes softened, the way her jaw set, like armor forged from years of pain. "You and Mason, you gave me back something I didn't realize I'd lost," he murmured. That night, after Caleb stepped outside to call Ramos again, Hannah tucked Mason into bed. As she smoothed the blanket over his chest, he reached up and took her hand. "Is Caleb gonna be my daddy now?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes shimmered. "I'll always protect us," she said softly. "And maybe, someday, if your heart says yes, he can be more." Mason smiled and curled into her side. When she returned to the living room, Caleb was sitting on the couch, rubbing his forehead. He looked up as she approached. "We did it," he said. "The order's active. Cole can't come near you without getting arrested." Hannah lowered herself beside him. "That means everything." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this since Tyler was born." Inside was a tiny wooden charm, carved in the shape of a heart. It was faded, edges worn smooth. "I made it during deployment. For him. I always told myself I'd give it to the person who made me believe again." He placed it gently in Hannah's palm. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. Outside, the night stretched quiet and long, but inside, something had shifted. They were still wounded, still healing. But now, they weren't doing it alone. It happened on a Sunday, quiet, too quiet. Hannah was humming softly while folding Mason's clothes when the doorbell rang. Caleb, already alert, moved to the peephole, his whole body stiffened. Standing on the porch in violation of the restraining order. Before Hannah could react, Caleb was already on the phone with the sheriff. His voice stayed calm, controlled, unlike the rage burning in his chest. Cole didn't even try to hide his smugness when the deputies arrived minutes later. "I just came to talk," he said casually, hands raised as they cuffed him. "Not today," one of the officers said coldly. "You're under arrest for violating a protective order." Mason peeked from behind the curtain, eyes wide. Caleb crouched down beside him. "It's over, buddy," he said. "You're safe now." Cole's arrest sparked a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Word spread. News trickled into the military legal system, catching the attention of Captain Ramos, Caleb's old comrade. He had been quietly working in the background to reopen Caleb's case, piecing together testimonies from soldiers who served with him. Within a week, a tribunal was convened, not for punishment but for justice. Caleb sat in a quiet room filled with military brass, his palms sweating, memories pressing in from every direction. But this time, he wasn't alone. Ramos spoke first. Then came private after private, recounting the night that had branded Caleb a traitor in the eyes of the system. Each voice peeled back layers of falsehood and shame. Each story aligned, and finally, the truth stood tall. A misinterpreted order, a failed radio signal, a young officer who gave everything to protect his squad and bore the consequences alone. When the verdict came down, clear of all charges, Caleb didn't cry. He breathed. For the first time in years, fully. But peace, it seemed, came with a price. As word of his exoneration spread, so did interest from the media. Headlines popped up. Parent, a federal resident found living off the grid with single mom. Hero or hermit, the man who disappeared. Reporters began circling Hannah's neighborhood like vultures. One even followed her to the grocery store. At first, Hannah recoiled. Then, she met Caleb's eyes and remembered who she was now. Not the frightened woman from a year ago, but someone who had fought for herself and for her son. Still, the pressure reopened a door she thought she had closed forever. Her former employer, the prestigious state conservatory, offered her a full-time faculty position. They called it an apology. Hannah saw it as a test. She spent 2 days pacing the floor, turning the offer over in her mind. It was her dream once. Now, it felt like someone else's memory. "I thought this was everything I ever wanted," she told Caleb one evening. "But I'd have to leave all of this. Our home, your healing, Mason's school." "You don't have to choose between purpose and peace," Caleb said, "but you do deserve to be seen, not just safe." Later that night, Mason approached Caleb with a crumpled paper medal he had cut out himself, crayons still smudged on the edges. It read, "For bravery and for fixing Mama's heart." Caleb knelt, emotion caught in his throat. "I think this is the highest honor I've ever gotten." Mason beamed and hugged him tight. Hannah held the medal in her hands after Mason had gone to bed, tracing the words with her finger. "Fixing Mama's heart." It struck her how far they had all come, from secrets and silence to healing and light. The next week, the town held a community fundraiser to rebuild the local park's amphitheater. It was simple, heartfelt, just a few folding chairs and a borrowed microphone on a grassy hill. But they'd asked Hannah to perform. She hesitated at first. Stage lights used to mean pressure, perfection. But now, with Mason in the front row and Caleb seated beside him, she stepped onto the makeshift stage in a soft blue dress, violin in hand. As she drew her bow, the world fell away. Her fingers danced across the strings, the melody slow, then rising, telling a story without words. The crowd watched in reverent silence. Some knew her history, some didn't. But they all felt it, the ache, the triumph, the truth. When she finished, Mason clapped the loudest, and Caleb stood. No cameras, no headlines, just peace. But peace was fragile. A letter arrived days later, this time not from the media, but from Cole's parents. It was a formal court notice. They were suing for custody of Mason, citing an unstable home environment and an ex-soldier with a violent past. Hannah's hands trembled as she read the lines. Caleb took the letter and set it down with quiet firmness. "You're bluffing," he said. "They have no case." But it didn't stop the fear. Court was scheduled in 2 weeks. Hannah dressed in a navy blue blazer, her hands clammy. Mason was with a trusted neighbor. Caleb stood beside her, wearing the same suit he'd worn at his military tribunal. In the courtroom, Cole's parents painted a picture of recklessness and risk. They brought up Hannah's old hospital stays for anxiety, Caleb's disappearance, and Mason's trauma. But Hannah's lawyer countered with documented growth school records, letters from Mason's teachers, community testimonial. Then came the final testimony. Hannah stepped forward, voice low but steady. "I was afraid once. I let that fear steal years from me. But I've learned that safety isn't just a locked door. It's love. It's truth. It's showing a little boy that scars don't mean broken." Caleb took the stand next. He didn't speak of his past. Instead, he spoke of the present. "Mason asked me if I was his dad," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I told him I'm his protector, that I'll stay for as long as he'll have me." The judge, a woman in her 60s, peered at them over her glasses. Her gavel didn't slamp. It tapped softly. "Custody will remain with Miss Walsh. This court recognizes not only the stability of her home, but the unmistakable presence of healing, care, and love." Hannah exhaled sharply. Caleb's hand found hers beneath the table. Outside the courthouse, Caleb lifted Mason high in the air. "We did it, champ." Mason grinned. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" Caleb nodded. "If that's okay with you." "It's more than okay," Mason said, burying his face into Caleb's shoulder. At night, back at the house, Hannah found a quiet moment alone. She stood by the window, watching Caleb and Mason set up a telescope in the backyard. Laughter drifted in. In her hand was the conservatory's offer letter, still unsigned. She folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer beside the metal Mason made. Her dream had shifted, not gone, just transformed. This was her spotlight now, and she didn't need a stage to shine. Spring arrived quietly, the garden blooming with subtle bursts of color and calm. Hannah stood by the kitchen window, her fingers curled around a mug of tea, watching Mason and Caleb crouched over the garden bed. Mason held a small trowel, his hands dirt-streaked, and Caleb patiently guided him with quiet words. They weren't planting flowers, they were planting roots. The kind that lasted. Inside the house, on the worn wooden table beside Hannah, sat a box. Caleb had left it for her that morning, simply saying, "When you're ready?" For hours, she hadn't touched it, afraid of what it might hold. Afraid that whatever was inside might undo the fragile peace they had started to build. But now, with Mason's laughter echoing through the open window and Caleb's gentle voice threading through it, she reached for the box. Inside was a notebook. Its leather cover was scuffed and sun-faded, the pages full of careful writing. At the very front, a folded sheet of paper sat loose, her name written in Caleb's handwritten. She opened it. "You written down everything I remembered," the note read. "The things I was never brave enough to say, the things I want Mason to know. And maybe one day, you too." Hannah turned the first page. There were entries from Iraq, stories of his team. The jokes they shared in the heat, the exhaustion in their bones, the guilt in their eyes when one of them didn't come back. There were confessions about how Caleb blamed himself for surviving, how he couldn't sleep when the world was silent, and how the loudest sound of all was Mason's laugh the first time he heard it. "I didn't know it then," one line read, "but I think the boy was healing something in me before I even realized I was broken." Her throat tightened. Outside, Mason called, "Mama, look what we planted." She blinked back tears, set the journal aside, and stepped into the sunlight. Caleb stood, brushing dirt from his hands. Mason held up a small sprouting plant, a sunflower seedling. His face was bright, proud. He wanted to grow something that could see the sky, Caleb said softly. Hannah crouched beside them, her hand brushing over the little green shoot. The moment Holland's mind abated her, he sat there for a second. That evening, after dinner and dishes and Mason curled up asleep beside the fireplace with a book, Hannah found Caleb in the backyard, sitting on the edge of the garden bed. The moon hung low above them, casting soft light over the wildflowers and fresh sprouts. She sat beside him, holding the notebook in her lap. "You wrote about Mason," she said quietly. He didn't look at her, just nodded. "I didn't know how to tell you the words out loud, but I needed you to know them." Olivia watched him, watching. "He also wrote about your pain. I wanted you to understand why I stayed away, why I thought I didn't deserve this." She turned to him. "But you do. We both made mistakes. We both lost pieces of ourselves in the fire." He finally met her gaze. "Do you believe we can build something real out of the ashes?" She reached for his hand. "We already are." In the silence that followed, it wasn't the absence of sound that filled them. It was the weight of meaning in everything unspoken. The wind passed gently through the garden, brushing the leaves like a whispered promise. The stars blinked slowly above, witnesses to their quiet beginning. The next morning, Mason tugged at Caleb's sleeve just after breakfast. "Can we go into town today?" he asked, voice hopeful. "I want to get something." Caleb raised a brow. "Something, huh? What kind of something?" "It's a secret," Merson whispered, glancing toward Hannah, who was busy tying up fresh herbs to dry above the sink. Hannah looked over, amused. "If you're planning trouble, I'm sending you both with a list." By the time they returned, the sun had shifted high and warm. Mason carried a small bag with all the gravity of a knight bearing a sacred scroll. He refused to let either of them see what was inside. That night, while Caleb washed up and Hannah read on the porch swing, Mason slipped outside with his secret. He returned just before bedtime and handed Hannah a folded piece of cardstock. It was a homemade card, the front decorated with carefully glued leaves, petals, and, in childlike scrawl, the words, "Thank you for making my heart brave again." Inside, a photograph had been placed, one of Caleb holding Mason high on his shoulders during their last picnic, both of them laughing. "I made it for you," Mason said shyly, "because when you sing and when you smile, I feel like I can do anything." Hannah hugged him tightly, tears stinging her eyes. "You're the bravest boy I know." Later that night, as the stars returned and quiet fell over the cabin again, Caleb lit lanterns around the garden. "What's this?" Hannah asked, stepping barefoot onto the dewy grass. "I'm surprised," Caleb said. "Come on." He led her gently by the hand, weaving through garden rows until they stood beneath the apple tree that had just begun to bloom. Beneath it sat an old wooden bench. Caleb had sanded and stained it, and carved a small inscription on the backrest. "For the days we survived, and the ones we chose to grow." He turned to her then, nervous for the first time in weeks. "I wanted to give you something that won't wither." Hannah ran her hand over the smooth carving. "This is beautiful." "You gave me a place to heal," he said, voice thick. "I want to give you a place to rest, even when things get hard, especially then." She stared at him for a moment, eyes glistening in the lantern glow. "You always carry other people's pain, don't you?" He gave a sheepish shrug. "Old habit." She said softly, "You don't have to carry mine alone anymore." They sat down together on the bench, shoulders touching. Around them, the scent of rosemary and thyme rose with the breeze, mingling with fresh soil and spring blossoms. Somewhere inside the house, Mason's nightlight flickered behind his curtain. The world was quiet, for once in all the right ways. Caleb looked at her, eyes uncertain. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Hannah nodded slowly. "I used to be afraid of the future. Now, I think I'm more afraid of not choosing it." His voice dipped. "Then let's choose it, even if we have to build it one scared, stubborn, hopeful day at a time." A beat of silence passed. Then she reached for his hand again, folding her fingers into his. "One day at a time," The garden didn't speak, but somehow it held the weight of their vows. Not with rings, not yet, but with roots, with trust, with the quiet courage of people who had once walked through fire and now stood blooming side by side. Summer crept in with golden mornings and quiet joy. The cabin no longer felt like a place people hid. It felt like a place people chose. Morning routines turned into rituals. Mason would feed the chickens while Caleb brewed coffee. Hannah hummed as she sliced fruit, sunlight casting halos through the window glass. Every little thing felt like a gift. The sound of Mason's giggle when Caleb taught him how to skip stones, the curve of Hannah's lips as she leaned into Caleb's side on the porch swing, the way Caleb's hand would automatically reach for Hannah's when they passed in the kitchen, like a reflex born from safety. One afternoon, Mason stood at the edge of the garden with something behind his back. "Close your eyes," he told them both, grinning. When they opened them, he held up a sign, hand-painted letters on a wooden plank that read, "The Anderhart Home." Hannah laughed softly, one hand over her heart. "That's quite the name." "It's all of us," Mason said proudly. "Anders for Caleb, Hart for me and Mom." Caleb knelt beside him. "You made that?" Mason nodded. "So no one ever forgets we belong." Later that evening, Hannah found Caleb in the garden, holding the sign. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded, voice low. "I used to think home was a place, but maybe it's people who choose to stay." She stepped closer. "Then this is home, because I'm not going anywhere." A week later, Caleb got the call. The military formally reinstated him as a civilian advisor. A quiet apology was issued, buried in paperwork and red tape, but it meant freedom. Legally, publicly, completely. Hannah squeezed his hand when he told her, "You don't have to accept, you know." "I know," Caleb replied, "but I want to. I want to serve again, just differently this time. Not with a gun, with guidance, with peace." She smiled. "Then, I'll be here when you come home each night." And he believed her. The town held a small welcome ceremony, a gathering in the school auditorium. Mason insisted on wearing a clip-on tie. Hannah wore the same sunflower dress she once used to teach music. The mayor gave a speech about courage and second chances, but it was Mason who stole the show. He stood on stage with a little microphone and read from a crumpled piece of paper. Show them all this, as though he couldn't be more grateful. He said, "For Clay with it," he said, "for being brave, for helping me with math, for hugging Mom when she cries in the laundry room." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Hannah's eyes filled. Mason finished, voice shaking just slightly, "And for showing us that just because something breaks doesn't mean it's over." The crowd rose in applause. Caleb hugged the boy tightly. "You've got a gift, you know." "So do you, so do you. You're our glue." Afterward, they walked home in silence, stars blinking into place overhead. Mason yawned and leaned against Caleb's side. Hannah linked arms with them both, her heart too full for words. Back at the cabin, a box sat waiting on the porch. Inside was a photograph from Caleb's former unit, all smiling, standing in front of a newly built shelter in a war-torn village. A note was scribbled on the back. "You helped us rebuild more than buildings." Caleb held it quietly for a long time. Then he tucked it onto the mantel, beside Mason's family sign and Hannah's favorite candle. All different pieces, all telling the same story. The garden had begun to bloom again. Not just with vegetables, but with color. Sunflowers, lavender, marigolds. Caleb had planted the seeds himself during the quiet winter months, not knowing if they'd survive. They had, just like them. One morning, Hannah walked into the kitchen to find Caleb bent over the table with something in his hands. A small wooden box. Inside, a silver ring lay nestled on a bed of wildflower petals. Mason's doing, no doubt. Caleb looked up nervously. "It's not about a wedding, not yet. It's about this." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You gave me a home when I was broken. You gave Mason a father when I didn't know I could be one. You let me carry your pain and share mine. I don't want to waste another second wondering if I deserve this." Her breath caught. He smiled. "I don't need a big ceremony, I just want to belong to you. If you'll have me." She blinked back tears, nodding through her quiet smile. "You've belonged to me since you handed me that crushed tomato and didn't run." They hugged, laughing and crying all at once. Mason ran in moments later, holding a bouquet of crooked flowers. "Are you guys getting married now?" "Eventually," Caleb said, lifting him up. "But today, we're just celebrating us." That weekend, they held a small party in the backyard. Neighbors, a few friends, people from town who once watched them with suspicion and now brought casseroles and pie. Laughter filled the air like wind through chimes. Mason performed a song with Hannah's help, a lullaby she once sang alone. Caleb joined on guitar, the melody steady, the harmony richer than the sum of its notes. As dusk settled and fireflies blinked through the trees, Caleb walked Hannah to the edge of the garden. He whispered, pointing to a blooming sunflower. "Was the first thing I planted. I wasn't sure it would survive, but it did. Just like you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Just like us." He kissed her temple. "No more hiding, no more running. From now on, we walk forward, together." She nodded, "Together." The stars spilled across the sky in quiet approval. Mason dozed off in a hammock nearby, clinging to a stuffed bear Caleb had repaired weeks earlier, stitch by stitch, like everything else in their lives. Hannah looked around at the home they'd built, not with blueprints or architects, but with patience, scars, and second chances. She whispered softly, "This is the life I never knew I could still have." Caleb squeezed her hand. "Then let's make sure it never ends." They stood like that for a long time, the hum of crickets around them, the warmth of the earth beneath their feet. Two broken souls. One rebuilt life. And a promise, silent but unshakable, that home wasn't just found, it was kept. Forever.